And I'm not coming to tell you that it's been perfect or this is exactly what you should do. This is modeled after the activities that we are usually involved with at a site, but we have been more involved here most likely than some of our other sites. So as a health educator, I always want to know something about the community that we're working with, and I provided some demographics here for you. First, I want to show you that here's the Lower Peninsula. Chris showed you a map earlier. This one gives you a little better idea of where the former base was. I have to admit I'm cheating here because I'm from a town, lived most of my life about up here, about an hour north, so I'm pretty familiar with this side of the state. It is a lower income side of the state. The economy always struggles up there. It's a little bit of an older population. I should mention that the median household income for Michigan is about $48,000, so you can see that the area does struggle a bit. Most of the population does have at least a high school education or higher. We have a good number of veterans in the area when you look at the population for Oscoda Township. This does not include the veterans and their families that were at the base in the past and have left the area, so we know that number is much greater. Go. Oscoda Township is located on the shore of Lake Huron. If you have never visited the Great Lakes, you should, and I don't know what you're waiting for, and Oscoda would love to have you. The main occupations up there are retail, some manufacturing, and some accommodation and food service, so not terribly high-paying positions. This is data from the 2012 census. Here we go. And Chris did mention the fishing that's the area is known for. She showed you a map earlier. Again, here's the base. Here's Van Etten Lake. This is the Osable River. This is a shot of the Osable River. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's taken from an overlook on the river here. And this is Lake Huron out here. The Osable River is a really well-known trout stream. People come from everywhere to fish that stream, and you can imagine our message was not well received. There's also kayaking events, canoe races that take place on the river, so it is well known for tourist-type activity. Lake Huron is known for its walleye fishing and other fishing as well. And then Van Etten Lake is fished, and it also has some resorts on it that the tourists come up to visit. So when we came along with our message about fish, it had an impact on people's fear for their health and well-being, but also a fear for the economy too. Restart the program. That can't be good. There we go. So the first round was mainly fish advisory information. And so we posted a sign. We really did post a sign. I'd like to post that sign right now. Aha, there's two signs. And, oh, we're going too far now. I guess patience is key here, right? Okay, one more. Post, please. All right, well, you actually saw the sign yesterday in Dr. Birnbaum's presentation. Thank you for promoting that sign, which is this sign. This is the first series of signs that we posted. We worked with a community group to develop these signs, and we had taken some drafts up to the community, and we had a sign that was not quite as stringent looking as this one. And they said, no, people need to understand that this is really important, and it needs to be black and white, and it needs to provide a message. And so this was the sign for Clark's Marsh. I took this picture last month. That's what it looks like now. And then this was the sign that we posted along the Osable River, and it told people not to eat the resident fish from the river, meaning the fish that live in the river year-round. And then that they could eat the fish from Lake Huron. They did not contain PFCs, and also that recreating in the river was fine. Dermal contact was not an issue. Those signs all disappeared pretty quickly, with the exception of this one, which seems to be enjoyed by the community, and we'll have to replace that one. This is the second sign that we posted along the Asabo. We created a warmer, fuzzier, friendlier message, still providing information about the fish advisory, don't eat the resident fish. But yeah, feel free to go have fun in the river, that touching the water won't harm you. When we go up for our meetings, Chris goes to the base closure team meetings, and I dash around to the bait shops and drop off brochures, and I check on the signs to see if they're still living with us. And almost all of these signs are still here. There are one or two that's missing. So it could be that this message has been better received. We also installed this one with tamper-proof bolts, so it's harder to remove. I want to point out, too, that we are now the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, so we were the Department of Community Health. So this is still us. And then the brochure provides information about eating fish from the entire county. So not just don't eat fish from Clark's Marsh. We try to always provide a message that's balanced with, if you can't eat these fish, go fishing here. Eat these fish instead. All right, so Chris mentioned that we issued the drinking water advisory. We work closely with District 2 Health Department. They do provide the reverse osmosis filter systems or the in-home water coolers, depending on the resident's choice. And then Chris is the main contact with residents for providing their water test results. She answers a lot of questions, talks to them about the drinking water recommendations. And I wanted to mention this because it's very important, and it was apparent when Chris was not at a meeting that we held in January, that people trust her. She's come to the meetings for, well, all the public meetings and the health department too. And they rely on having that same trusted person providing them with consistent information. We do hold our meetings on a quarterly basis. Sometimes it's longer if we have nothing new to report to the community. We hold an afternoon open house where people can come and just wander and visit the various agencies and get information. And then we hold a more formal public meeting in the evening where there are presentations given by the partner agencies. We always have between 100 and 150 people that show up. That's a pretty good turnout for such a small community. And those meetings always last for 4 hours. And people stick with it. They stay with it until the bitter end. So we have the formal presentations, and then we stay as long as people want to ask questions. And they have a lot of questions, and they have a lot of concerns that they want to share as well. As we do, we developed fact sheets. We have a fact sheet on the PFASs. We developed this fact sheet in response to the water results that were being mailed. The Air Force had a set of test results they were mailing. The Department of Environmental Quality had a set of test results they were mailing. They use different laboratories. Sometimes science speak isn't plain language, and so we're pretty adamant about using plain language and communicating with communities, and so we sent those out with the results as well. And then this document is a series of questions that was given to us by people who live at Van Etten Lake. It's about 6 pages long, and all of our agencies work together to answer those questions, and we made that available at meetings and also on our website, which is here. So we felt like we need to do a better job of engaging with the community. We still are getting questions, and this is not unexpected, but we still get questions about some basic information. What does the lifetime health advisory mean? So we have a small group that's met once. I requested people who were interested to join us, and we've met once. We're meeting again next week, and really the purpose of that group is to help us guide our communications to the community. It's not the RAB. It's very informal. We hope to keep it that way, and if it morphs into something better or bigger, that's great. If we need to remove ourselves from the work group, we will, and we'll still continue to provide public health support. Some of the top concerns, which I also heard yesterday, people want that health study done. not just the veterans, the people who live in the community as well. Some basic questions, as I mentioned, the people who are non-engaged, typical at a lot of sites, and I heard that as well yesterday. Cleanup, when will this be cleaned up? They're concerned about funding for municipal water because since we haven't reached that 70 number, the Air Force will not provide municipal water and funding has to come from elsewhere, and that's a real struggle. Transparency, of course. People are always concerned about that when it comes to government agencies. And again, the lifetime health advisory level, what does that mean? I threw this slide in here because we get requests from the community to do more, provide more press releases, tell people what's happening up here. The water's fine, you can go swimming in the lake, you can go fishing. But then we have people who say, don't do that because you're bringing more negative attention to the area. So it's a balance, and we, at this point, have not done a whole lot more with media coverage about dermal exposure, fine to swim in the water, because there's that concern that if we do that, we're just letting people know there's a problem up in the Escoda Township. So one of those balancing acts that you walk in working with the community, and this is where the community, we hope, can give us some guidance. So the next steps, as I mentioned, we're meeting again next week. We'll continue to hold public meetings. We'll continue to provide updates to the community. At the next open house, I want to do something broader than just this community group, and I want to have sticky sheets up on the wall and have people tell us what their top concerns are, and we'll ask some other questions, and we'll have a broader group than just this small group give us more feedback. I also wanted to say that this has been such a great meeting, and I've learned a lot, and this is probably one of the best meetings I've attended in quite some time. I have heard bits and pieces of communication, and I hope that communication component can continue as well. So the communicators who are working on this situation, excuse me, my cough, can continue to stay in contact, and we can share resources, best practices, all sorts of things as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Chris and Sue. And our last speaker today is Fardin Oliaei, who was an environmental scientist with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, where she was the head of the Emerging Contaminants Program. And now she is with DST Health Solutions. So please join me in welcoming Fardin, and we'll get her talk up here. Thank you, Liz.
How do I go up? I think it's up to go forward. Okay. And then this is the laser pointer. If the button's not work, you always hit spacebar to go forward.
Yeah. Good morning. Still morning. And I actually was very impressed to listen to Alyssa about your experience, and I was just thinking, wow, what it was in Minnesota and my experience, how I wish it was a bit closer to what you have done in your state. So I am going to actually, there is so much for me to say from my scientific work, as well as, should I stay here? Scientific work, as well as my own personal story about the experience I went through for several years, but also share the information about my activities after I left or I was forced out of my job from Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
I think you want to press the space bar here.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about my research on emerging contaminants. Initially, before working on perfluorochemicals, and I'm sorry if I'm using PFCs because this is the work I've done for almost 15 years ago, and I'm still learning about using PFAS instead. So I talk a bit about that because my role as an emerging contaminant program, the scientist, chief scientist, was to look at unregulated emerging contaminant, and I started with pharmaceutical care products, and then PBDEs, and ultimately, as I was going to conferences, finding that PFCs or the PFAS are more significant, especially for Minnesota. So I'll talk a bit about that, and then my personal story after revealing the widespread contamination of Minnesota environment with these chemicals, and to what extent, in fact, the polluters were buying the influence with politicians and having an effect in their decision-making for regulatory purpose. And then I look at the larger global pictures because as I moved out of Minnesota, because I couldn't find any job there after my forceful resignation, I came to the Harvard Kennedy School, and in fact, I looked at the much larger, through a larger, more colorful lens on the global perspective of this chemical, and got involved with scientists who work with the new POPs in Stockholm Convention. So this is just a, this is not showing, the arrow is not showing there, right?
I think the cursor doesn't show.
Okay, cursor, okay.
But you could use the pointer.
Yeah, well, I don't need for this, but this was actually the discovery of PFC's contamination from 3M manufacturing facility in Minnesota, and then environmental releases and health risks, was the first comprehensive study so far for 15 years ago when we initiated this work, but also it was the first time even talking in Minnesota about these chemicals that revealed the widespread contamination due to improper management of the waste with the mismanagement of this chemical by facility, 3M facility that produced these chemicals. So 3M company, as a primary global producer of PFOA, PFOS, and related compounds, has 3 places in the world. One is in Minnesota at the Cottage Grove facility, and the other is in Decatur, Alabama, and the third one is in Antrim, Belgium. So it was reasonable to look at Minnesota as a hotspot for doing this investigation. Especially knowing that for 5 decades these chemicals were produced and improperly the waste was discharged in different part of the area that in fact created significant contamination that led to advisory, fish advisory, drinking water advisory, providing bottled water, and etc. This is just okay. This is just showing the small part of the Veritas, Washington County, where the pollution, the Cottage Grove facility is. So the study area, which actually the study was very comprehensive, and the reason for that was because I was not only a scientist, but also working with the regulatory agency, which had the ability and access to go to 3M, to the facility that is producing, to look at the closed landfills that was not really accessible to regular scientists. And then, so all of these things was because of the position I was able to do that. So The study was comprehensive in a way that it was following the waste from 3M, looking actually at the closed landfill that for decades was receiving these toxics, and then the open landfills that was receiving waste from, from 3M, and then discharging the leachates to the wastewater treatment plant, and then following the contaminant through the Mississippi River and fish. And in fact, the study started initially looking at the broader aspect in Lake Superior as well, to look at the surface water, sediment, and in fact, the sediment sample was very much unique, because usually for the core sampling, they would go down to 1 centimeter. But the work that we've done that was almost for a week in the research vessel in the middle of Lake Superior, we looked at 2 millimeters. So it was very unique work and extensive that unfortunately I had to leave the result behind after I left the agency. So, and I have to say that this was kind of the strategy for sampling that we did was, in fact, later on was adopted with the Stockholm Convention for implementing and doing similar kind of work for the west side of all of the production or wherever the waste was created. So this is actually is in one of our publications that I don't have it reported, but I can provide those information later, and I believe that Linda also had it in her presentation. So this was the production facility, and the way that, do you hear me if I come here? Because I can't see this here. Yeah. You don't? Okay. Yes. Okay, now you can hear me. So I kind of looked at first the landfill, closed landfill, Washington County, looked at the soil profile going from the surface down to the groundwater, and then looked at the groundwater contamination. And because of the unique situation of the kind of a spray system that it had, we were concerned also about the air pollution because of semi-volatile characteristic of some of PFAS. And this was a closed landfill that for decades receiving this chemical, and in fact was not lined at the time that I started the investigation in 2002 and through 2005. And then there was another Pine Bend landfill that was at that time was receiving PFCs, the PFAS waste from 3M, and the leachates was transferred to wastewater treatment plant, Metro wastewater treatment plant, that their sludge actually mostly was incinerated at a temperature that would not destroy these chemicals. So another way of transferring this contaminant back to the atmosphere. And whatever that would be applied as a biosolid or most toxic form, that I don't know why they term this biosolid, they use that biosolid because it's nothing but concentrated toxic. So would apply to the land and then obviously find its way through the environment and the pathway to the human exposure and wildlife. And so the study that I did was comprehensive in a way that looking at it from production to landfill to wastewater, surface water, groundwater, Mississippi fish, and Mississippi water. And you mentioned, Chris mentioned about the highest concentration of fish that was reported. I have to say that I won that because there was one small bass that was 1 year old, and it has 9,605 I have to make sure. It was close to 100,000. So it was, yours was 9,000. So it was very much higher. Pardon me? The nanogram per liter, or nanogram actually per gram, I should say. Yeah, part per billion. Yeah. Yes, yeah. In fact, you know, I shouldn't focus on my research because I'm supposed to talk about my story, but I have too much of passion for this work because this was the first phase, and I was in the process of starting the second phase, which would look at the waste from you know, vegetation and going to further to look at it and look at the wider spread of contaminants. So the fish sampling that I did was, I have to say, it was kind of secretly with very of my supportive colleagues from Department of Natural Research and Department of Health, that we would go at the midnight in Mississippi River, and behind the 3M where they would you know, discharge this chemical behind their facility. And the sample was taken, I mean, with flashlight, honestly, to extract the fish blood as part of the sampling. So it was a lot of excitement. And but at that time, I knew that I'm not going to, I knew that my job was not going to continue, so I wanted to get the most information at the limited time and the influence I had with as a public servant, I should call myself. Okay, it just went to that by itself. I didn't push anything. So what happened after discovering of this PFC's contamination? I was, at the same time, I was reached out with NPR, Minnesota Public Radio, for, in fact, looking at my previous work that was done with a similar pattern with PBDEs, flame retardants. And when the investigator reporter reached out and wanted to talk about PBDEs, apparently one of the father of PBDE scientists, Aki Bergman, introduced me and wanted to urge them to discuss about these chemicals in US. So I told her that I think that for Minnesota, considering the extent of contamination that we had, I would rather to talk about more important emerging contaminant, which would be PFCs. And I knew at that time I was under a lot of pressure. The commissioner, my managers, all of them, in fact, asked me not to cut my proposal, even though I had over $160,000 in my program. They told me that I didn't have even, keep asking me to cut to $1,400,000, and yet they didn't approve my investigation. That is why I used some of my PBDE work, the sampling that I was doing for flame retardant I used for, and sending it to Access Analytical, that at that time was one of the very few analytical service in Canada to do the work for us. And in fact, in the end, for the fish, they did over $30,000, $40,000 free of service work, which I should maybe not mention that. But the whole thing is that when NPR reached out and asked me, I knew that I have to go through the proper channels, which means to get approval through our agency. And that was when they approved it, but under the condition, even commissioner and deputy commissioner urged me to not to downplay the situation. And I said that, don't say that. And my work started from 2001, and they said that, I should mention that it was from 2003 or so, which was after carbon-8 was ceased or production. So which I said that, well, I can't do that. I mean, whatever. I did go to the interview, and I did say, when they asked me that how important it is, I said that Minnesota is a hot spot, and we should do investigation here, and considering that it is one of the top places in the world, one of the 3 places in the world with these chemicals contamination. And that was, as soon as NPR report was aired, I was reprimanded with with MPCA management, and when I reached out to the commissioner, she also confirmed that this is a regulatory agency and no place for a scientist, so urged me to look for a job somewhere else. And I said to her that you've been here for a couple of years. I've been here 16 years, and that is what I have been doing. But anyway, but after I was forced out of my job, after a couple of months, I believe, she also was forced to resign. But the thing is, after, I think for those who are interested about the history of PFC's contamination in Minnesota, Toxic Trace is a document with NPR, is very informative. And in fact, I believe they got some kind of award for protecting the public, saying the information that supposed to be aired, shared with the public. And then at the same time, the legislature, Minnesota legislatures, became more interested about learning about my work because of not everyone, I have to say that selected legislatures, mostly Democrats, they wanted me to go and present my work, which was over 120 pages, to the Minnesota Senate hearing. And I went to a couple of these hearings, and I shared the information. And in fact, after that, and that was when I had to express how I have been treated at the agencies. And that was when I was put in an administrative leave till I don't know, I don't say negotiation, but then I was told that if you don't resign, you will be escorted out of your office. That was on Friday, so I had to walk out of my job. So, and then I think the op-ed that was published at that time, but Senator Marty, John Marty, who was in fact the head of environmental Senate hearing, is an excellent article, in my view, comparing what was happening in Minnesota with West Virginia and DuPont, that how the lobbyists, polluters pay for to bring their own people. In our case, Sherry Corrigan was a former executive director in NPFs in 3M that worked directly with perfluorochemicals and was well aware of the toxicity and all the information related to that. And then, so it's how these polluters take advantage of so-called fox guard in the chicken coop arrangement, which was very much similar to what was happening in West Virginia at that time. That was one of the attorney of DuPont became the commissioner for their environmental protection. And then the last article is, in fact, was in the City Page, and I wasn't even know about this article, was that I put my picture here because I like it more than myself. It was, and the painter or whatever his name was Picasso, which I don't know how. But it was the first page of the newspaper, and it said that when good science is bad politics, but also underneath said the woman who talked too much, which was about me. And but it went through the story of my, the whole struggle. And it started with the time that I had to walk out of, after 16 years, they gave me only 1 hour with guard to go to my office and collect my stuff and leave the office. And it was emotionally hard time for me because I just lost my father at that time. I had his picture, and I had to leave everything behind. I couldn't take everything with me. And then, but they allowed me to bring everything. So it was like 40 boxes of the research that I've done in PBDEs, pharmaceuticals, PFCs, all of those I brought home. And it was the day that I brought in I think that it was Friday. So on Saturday morning, I was sitting with all these boxes around me, and I opened and I got the newspaper, I think it was Star Tribune, and there was a picture of me, a small picture of me, the scientist, MPCS scientist resigned, which was not true. And so I was forced to get out of my job. But then I opened the newspaper. It was a bigger picture of George Bush in Minnesota shaking hands with 3M authorities, regarding them as the most environmentally supportive or the industry. So that part just shook me, that who was I fighting with? That I was just a tiny little dust fighting with a mountain of corruption, in my view. But that's my story. Am I done? Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Well, I have to tell you, it is 11 years past, and when I was asked with Phil and to come and talk, it wasn't an easy decision for me. It was a lot of pain underneath, and I think that it was a good closure for me, and I appreciate being here. But it doesn't mean I stopped doing my research. And that's why I just had half of my slide was I knew emotionally I get to this page and don't move forward. But I really want to say that after there, I have 2 minutes, okay. I did a lot of work with the community. We developed a Women Environmental Institute in Minnesota, and I was actually, while I was going to Harvard Kennedy, every other weekend, I was going back home and teach the community about this contaminant. And then later, I got involved with the Stockholm Convention, and that was the part I wanted to give this message of the global treaty, Rotterdam, the Basel and Stockholm Convention. And even though almost 180 countries are part of this treaty, United States is not. So you all scientists really have to take some action to be involved with that, because we have to look at this chemical beyond the local issues. It become a global, and I think that developing countries and less developed countries who are receiving our waste need your help.
Thank you so much, Fardin.